Welcome to the study of cybersecurity in Asia. The course is unique in Australia and has few peers in the world. In this program of study, we will look at Russian political hacking, North Korean cyber attacks on civil nuclear power stations, and United States military preeminence in cyberspace. We will look at the national cybersecurity policies of Iran, Israel, India, Japan, and Southeast Asia. And of course, China and Indonesia will get a lot of attention. I want to take these last two countries mentioned, China and Indonesia, to illustrate some of the issues we will address. In late January 2016, China and Indonesia showed their mutual capacity for strategic innovation when a senior Indonesian official revealed the wide-ranging scope of their cooperation on cyberspace issues. Since cyberspace was described in China's 2015 military strategy as one of the two commanding heights of international security competition, along with outer space, the agreement between Indonesia and China is worthy of the closest study by Australia. Of special note is the announced plan for Beijing and Jakarta to work together on cyber war simulations, though they will most likely work on the civil infrastructure impacts rather than military combat applications in these simulations. The report in the newspapers on the China-Indonesia agreement poses at least three interesting questions for Australia. Is Indonesia shying away from a closer embrace by the Five Eyes intelligence community, possibly as a result of Edward Snowden's revelations of their espionage effort against Indonesian President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono when he lived in the Merdeka Palace? Does the agreement demonstrate a greater capacity for institutional and diplomatic innovation in our region on cyberspace issues than Australia itself has so far shown? Since Indonesia is a relatively close partner of Australia and China isn't our enemy, can Canberra benefit from the new cyber relationship and insert itself into its implementation? So that's the three questions. Let me take them each in turn. First, is Jakarta moving towards China and away from the Five Eyes for support in its cybersecurity policy? Well, Jakarta and Canberra do have useful cyber collaboration, some dating back a number of years, especially in countering cybercrime. Since 2011, the Australian Federal Police has helped to establish a number of Indonesian centres for countering cybercrime. The two countries collaborate on cyber issues in a number of regional frameworks, such as the ASEAN Regional Forum and the APEC Telecommunications and Information Ministerial Meeting. On the other hand, on the 2nd of December 2015, according to the ABC, the Australian Reserve Bank believes that Indonesia was behind a recent cyber attack on it. In late January 2016, the ABC reported that an Indonesian government agency was using surveillance software embedded in the Global Switch data centre in Sydney. So one might be forgiven for believing that the cybersecurity relationship between Indonesia and between Indonesia and Australia may be trending downwards. Countervailing evidence on a strategic shift has come from the senior responsible official in Indonesia as recently as September last year. According to Chairman of the National Cyber Information Defence and Security Desk, which is part of the Coordinating Ministry of Political, Legal and Security Affairs in Indonesia, Air Vice Marshal Argus, Indonesia has, quote, studied cyber defence systems in various countries such as the United States, Australia, Singapore and others, unquote, and that Indonesia will cooperate with these countries in terms of cyber defence while maintaining a neutral stance. So we probably need more evidence to be certain one way or the other about Indonesia's intentions. We do know that Indonesia has long prided itself on non-alignment, but the recent announcement on cyber cooperation with China seems to have trumped anything in place between Indonesia and other cyber partners. The second question. The agreement reveals a surprising element of diplomatic innovation in the cyber field, more than Australia has shown. While Indonesia and Indonesia have foreshadowed deeper cooperation through 2015, the scale and scope of what is now on the table between China and Indonesia is very different from what is in place between Indonesia and Australia. The apparent breadth of the relationship may be explained by the fact that the two countries have new or emerging cyberspace agencies, that's Indonesia and China, each of which has the resources, bureaucratic weight an independent authority to deliver such an outcome. These agencies also have an incentive to be seen to be delivering. In mid-2015, a year after China had set up its cyberspace administration, President Widodo of Indonesia announced a plan to set up the National Cyber Security Agency to report directly to him. The agency is being formed on the foundation of the existing centre in the coordinating ministry that I mentioned above. In comparison, Australia still does not have a cyber agency with similar power and diplomatic freedom as the Chinese and Indonesian organisations. Thus, the innovative agreement between China and Indonesia may be an example of the sort of breakthroughs that can occur if governments are prepared to consider institutional innovation in their diplomacy for the cyber area. Third question, can Australia benefit from the fast-moving pace of cyber diplomacy to its north? Well, it most certainly can. In some respects, the Australian cybersecurity sector is more advanced in technological terms than that in Indonesia or even in China. Indonesia will need a raft of expertise and equipment that can't be supplied by China. The planned new Cybersecurity Growth Centre in Australia could exploit the opportunity provided by the Indonesia-China agreement. And just as importantly, the agenda of those two countries for the cyber collaboration, focusing on civil infrastructure, isn't in any way against Australian interests, but highly complementary to them. So this is an area where Australian capability urgently needs to be developed, as we've argued in research at the Australian Centre for Cybersecurity, for example, in a paper we published in 2016 called Australia Rearmed. Smart diplomacy would see Australia talking to both China and Indonesia about how we might support their joint efforts. Well, that short account of Indonesia-China cyber relations is a bit of a teaser for what you should find to be a very wide-ranging and stimulating course on cybersecurity in Asia. Please work with me and with your fellow students to get the most out of it. Concentrate on the key ideas rather than the latest news, and seek out the best academic sources and policy studies to get a deeper appreciation of the challenges of cyber security in Asia. In the information age, knowledge is power.